group today. Looks like more people are trickling in. I'm Matt Davenport. I'm the CEO of Monarch Environmental, but today is, I said it to someone before, to Dale, that really the talent is going to be speaking today, and that's not me. That's Bethany Ross and Nick Piveroff. I just wanted to say a few things about them, then I'm going to turn it over to those two. But so on behalf of Monarch Environmental, I really appreciate you guys taking time. This is a super important topic. Nick Piveroff, he's the Assistant Fire Marshal for Community-Wide Wildfire Mitigation Division of Orange County Fire Authority. And Nick has always been on the forefront of collaboration with communities. And I really appreciate that personally, Nick. And then Bethany Ross, our very own consultant at Monarch Environmental. And she's also the CEO of the California Sustainability Group. She's a certified horticulturist, certified arborist, a certified mother. Is that a thing? all around awesome person. But the goal of our discussion today is to provide an update on new and upcoming regulations on wildfire prevention. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end. You can feel free to write your questions in the box, in the chat box, and we'll respond, as things go. But the goal is to really just be fluid and informal and hopefully to provide some good education. So with that, I will turn it over to Bethany and Nick. Thank you, guys.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So, and you want to go to the next slide? There we go. So as many of you know, we had new fire severity maps released from CalFire, specifically for Orange County in March 24th. So a lot of the other areas have received their maps throughout the year. It was about a 4-phase release process. And the state responsibility area maps were released end of last year. So, there's a lot of areas, if you can see with that comparison map, basically the 2011 map had about 57,821 acres mapped, and the local responsibility area very high. It's a pretty significant change, as you can see from this new maps. We now have 3 levels of fire severity zones, very high, high, and moderate. And actually 96,141 acres are now mapped. So, and of those, 64,998 acres are mapped in the very high in Orange County. It's a pretty big deal. Since the new maps came out, I've had a lot of homeowners reach out very concerned that because either their homes are in the high or the very high or near those areas, that their house is going to fire neck. And so can you help us understand the purpose of the fire severity maps and what they mean?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. So Bethany mentioned 2011 versus 25. 2011 required everyone to adopt just the very high. Senate Bill 63 brought in the requirement to now adopt all 3 zones, very high, high, and moderate. And so the CalFire maps themselves are what they consider a hazard map versus a risk map where the insurance company uses. I'm reading off, if I look up because my screen's almost on the ceiling, conditions created by fire behavior over a 50-year period without considering short-term modifications. So a lot of your HOAs do modifications, whether it's fuel mod or defensible space. So we'll get into that a little bit further down the road. But the risk is the potential damage fire can do under the existing conditions, including fuels reduction and defensible space and the ignition resistant building construction. So that's what you guys do as an HOA, and that's what your insurance carriers are looking at. CalFire used the best available science and data to develop what they called the model. And it's a huge model. Imagine, a little footprint of Orange County, considered the whole state of California. Bethany mentioned they had to map the SRA, but also, which is the state responsibility area. But now they had to do the LRA, which is now the whole state of California. You can imagine what this model looks like. It evaluated the probability of area burning and potential fire behavior in the area. And the factors they brought into is fire history. And some of your HOAs probably have some fire history. Vegetation, the flame lengths, when we talk vegetation height, we talk about flame length as well. And then the biggest component is the ember intrusion or embers blowing into the community, and then proximity to wildland and your terrain, your topography comes into consideration in regards to Santa Ana wind conditions and the alignment of your homes and your community, and then the overall weather. So that, in a nutshell, is what it is. And there's a website with CalFire explaining all of that a little bit more in depth. So we talked about defensible space. Well, are we transitioning now? Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, hold on, we'll get that
We
figured out.
talked about this, try to be fluid, and there I go, mess it up. First slide. The maps themselves are a tool to assess the protection of the community itself. So hazard versus risk. And so looking at the defensible space versus the fuel mod.
Could you explain that real quick? Because I know there's a lot of people who use the term fuel mod, and when they're talking about the WUI or the perimeter slopes that are left to be a little more natural. Can you define that for us?
Absolutely. So when I talk about defensible space and fuel mod, it's, in my mind, it's called vegetation management. Some of your HOAs have a fuel modification plan that was a condition of build at the time of your community when it went in. So if you're scratching your head going whether I have a fuel mod or not, we should help you determine that or not, because there's a lot of communities that are now going to be brought into the annual requirement that we'll get into a little bit further. But
That's a records request, correct?
that is, but before you send tons of requests in, there's going to be an email at the end of this presentation that you can email, and looking for HOA name and then location or city would help us determine that, and we'll respond back whether you have one or not in the process. If you do have one, what to do. So we talked about it's a condition of build. If you have a fuel mod, then you should use it. If you're to go out to bid for your landscape conditions, it's a tool that you can use to make sure that you have exactly what you need in regards to fuel mod, and making sure landscape companies are doing to what that plan is called out as. Because it really is a condition of build, just like fire hydrants and road widths and things like that. It's should be recorded. It should have been recorded in your CCNR correctly, which it kind of brings it into state law a little bit. So again, if you have a question whether you're fuel mod or not, please email us and I'll get the right inspector for the city to respond to you and help you out that way. Defensible space is a government code. So fuel mod is a condition of build, and then defensible space is if your HOA was not built to a fuel mod standard. And we've had standards since '79 in Orange County, but it doesn't mean your HOA was built to a fuel mod. So again, understanding that is very important, because state law 100 feet or the property line is what the government code reads. And it's from occupied structures. So
now,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I was going to say, I've seen a few communities who think they have a fuel mod, or that's in their CCNRs on the map. However, when we went through this exercise with you and did a records request, it was determined that those areas deemed fuel mod were actually not. So that would fall under defensible space. Was that something? So we should just, I would say, recommending to homeowner associations, determine if this area is considered defensible space or you actually have a registered fuel mod, because maintaining those areas once a year as fuel mod when they should be maintained as defensible space could affect you with these new very high fire severity zones.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Do you want to go over how we're going to be affected through each of the fire severity zones, starting with very high?
Sure. I'll add one thing too. It's kind of an interesting time right now. So when I speak to very high, high, and moderate, we're in a code adoption year. So we do code adoption. The cities and counties do code adoptions every 3 years. And so we do a lot of amendments to those fire codes and building codes. And so it's kind of an interesting time right now because as state law minimum now, as I'm going to go through it, it may include some more requirements at the end of the year. So what I say now may be completely different in a few months, or at least by the end of the year. So I'm going to tell you what state law is currently and then kind of give you a hint on where I feel it may be going. So when you're in the very high, you can expect an annual vegetation management inspection. And remember, I said vegetation management because right now I don't know if you're field mod or defensible space. And so super clear to understand what that is. Dead and dying component within that fuel mod or that defensible space zone. When I say defensible space and 100 feet or the property line, we do include the HOA land. So if your homes have a 20-foot setback, which is a 20-foot backyard, and you have an 80-foot slope that's maintained by HOA, we OCFA do include that 80 feet for a total of 100. So super important to understand that. Ladder fuels, shrubs, trees. The idea of fire behavior is keeping the fire on the ground and not getting into the shrubs and trees. So that's how we evaluate it. And we're going to talk to a lot of communities that have never been affected by an annual inspection. And so we're looking at, a slow process, but just modifying the fuels just a bit to again, try to reduce that ladder fuel into the trees. Ground covers, for example, should be 24 inches. You have it on the screen right there. One big component too is within actual defensible space, again, without a field mod, tree spacing always seems to be a concern. We do not go after existing trees on slopes that are not considered a field mod. There might be a situation in a field mod slope that you have a lot of trees that have grown in between the existing trees that were shown on the plans. We would require those to be removed, but if you have a defensible space slope, we do not get after trees that were originally planted at the landscape review of that community. That makes sense. Also in the very high, real estate disclosure is also required. It's also required in the high as well. So if you're to sell your house and you're in the very high, you have to have us come out and do a defensible space or veg management inspection. And that's tied to Assembly Bill 38, which was in 2020. And that's exactly kind of what we talked about. We have guidelines that will help you understand what we want on private land, on the footprint of the property, and then also on the HOA land as well. And that's on our website. If you were to build new in the very high, you'd have to build to the building code chapter 7A or residential code 337. It's the highest standard now that talks to eaves and vents and windows and things like that. In the high itself, that meet your need in the very high, Bethany?
Yes.
Okay. Zone 0 is something too that's going to be implemented in 2029, and we'll talk a little further about that. But in the high itself, real estate disclosure, just like we talked about in the very high, will be required to be completed. That one's going to be really tricky because obviously there's not going to be any annual enforcement done in the high, but somehow we have to get defensible space compliance in the high when you guys sell your homes in the high. Also the building code requirement, if you're to rebuild your house, and I don't know right now, a lot of you are thinking maybe, not rebuilds, but more of like an add-on or something. I'm not sure what all the cities are going to do in regards to that. Are they going to require you to build the addition 27A when your other home was built in the 80s and it's completely different? I don't know what that's going to look like here real soon. So defensible space is required for real estate disclosure, and then chapter 7A in the high. And the moderate, remember I mentioned a lot of changes in regards to state laws with code adoption. There is some conversation about the state of California bringing in some requirements in the moderate, but currently there's no changes.
Okay, so Nick, when will communities and homeowners that are affected by these new, if they went unmapped and now they're in the high or very high, when will when will you start doing your defensible space inspections?
Right. We're going to go out tomorrow. No, just kidding. It's completely unfair for us to expect you are going to be compliant this year. So I've got approval from the executive board here at OCFA that, this year, 2025 is going to be an educational opportunity for us to educate what, and for me, it's why you're doing it. Why now all of a sudden you're in a mapped area and you're at a hazard map. So this year is going to be an educational opportunity, and I highly recommend you guys reaching out to us. Our goal is, and I've told the inspectors, to get out and talk to all of your HOAs that are now going to be affected by these maps and be proactive and get out there and educate. Next year, we're going to have to enforce, and I'm not sure what that looks like. I think it's going to be a lot of conversations continued through the year with potential work plans. There's going to have to be work done because it is a state law.
Mm-hmm. All right, so board members, this is the time. I know we're getting into budget season. Start assessing, work with OCFA inspectors, Monarch consultants, have landscape committees go out, but this is a great time to be looking at common area slopes, looking at the height. Can we reduce this ground cover vegetation to 24 inches? If not, maybe mark this slope as a renovation and then prioritize. And I know I had a walk like this on Monday with an inspector, and it was a very useful tool for prioritizing based on the direction of embers coming from a wildfire, not necessarily next to the community, but elsewhere. And that was how we're going to work through the community. But, if you can divert funds that you've already allocated for maybe updating annual color or just renovations in general that don't have a specific home, it might be a good time to even start allocating some of those funds on acacia removals or, the things that you identify that don't necessarily meet the defensible space guidelines. So OCFA does have one specific to HOAs. It's called the Defensible Space Guidelines for Homeowners Association Interior Slope Areas. It's a very useful tool that can help you with ground cover heights, maintenance ideas for plants and trees. So we can definitely have someone send that link out to that document so you can utilize that, or even the vegetation management guidelines, the CO5. That's another useful tool for determining if your slopes meet that. But I would definitely use what did you say, the interior slope one for HOAs first, and then for maybe plantings, the vegetation management guidelines?
Yeah, be very careful using that CO5 because we have an undesirable plant list there that people are going to latch onto and fix their view issues and all this other concerns they have, pine trees and ukes and things like that are undesirable on a new build are allowed in existing communities.
Sure. Yeah. We're not really, you're not necessarily requiring those to be removed. It's more of like, don't plant those species moving forward. Correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
So Nick, in regards to the timeline about the real estate defensible space inspections or the DSDs, when will that actually come into play for homes in the very high that are, being put on the market?
Okay. So if my math is right, the cities were notified on March 24th, which puts it July 24th of this year. After that date would be implemented 120 days.
Okay.
Correct.
Unless they adopt sooner, correct?
Well, no, that was an actual question on a pretty lengthy conversation yesterday. How are we going to adjust and how are we going to monitor? There's 13 cities and unincorporated that are affected by these maps, including Buena Park, which is interesting. But so we as an agency are using 120 days of when those maps were dropped, whether like if you're in Dana Point and went to council last night. So in 30 days, it's going to be adopted, but we're not going to enforce until July 24th of this year.
All right. Okay, so the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection, also known as CalFire, has been working on new guidelines for the areas basically between 0 to 5 feet from a building. I know the guidelines are still being developed. They're in draft form right now. But Nick, can you please kind of loop us in with what you know about what to expect with Zone 0?
Honestly, I do not know. No, it's interesting. It's 2020 law that came into effect. It's AB 3024, and it's 2020. What is it? 2025 now. So 5 years. There's a reason why it's taken a long time for the Board of Forestry and CalFire, which are different groups, come up with guidance on how to live in your backyard within 5 feet of your house, because it is sketchy, telling someone how to live. But what they're trying to do is eliminate the ember reignition, and that's a leading cause of structure loss. So it's going to be some type of non-combustible zone. Whether I don't see it as 5 foot of concrete around every house, because CalFire has to really evaluate Northern California versus Southern California and what those environments look like, and they're completely different. So they have to kind of understand both regions' needs and wants and try to bring it into a state law, which is this 3074. Probably a lot of succulents. Heavy woody material next to windows will not be allowed. They've even talked about non-combustible. You got to get rid of all your wood pots and put non-combustible pots within that 5 foot zone. The common sense stuff too about storage and trash cans and wood piles within 5 feet. You shouldn't do that anyways, due to ember reignition. So a lot of gravel, a lot of rocks, a lot of pavers, a lot of succulents, and focus would be around the windows is what I'm hearing.
Yep. Okay. And that's for all types of buildings, correct?
That is correct. Whether it's commercial, residential, multifamily, all types of residents.
Okay. I know I watched the Zone 0 presentation, and this was one of the ideas that they had. So you can see they have basically all hardscape up to their home. I think, maybe for what I've seen, I think we can definitely come up with some really neat alternatives where you can still have that lush, not lush, but green around your home. You still have the pots with small plants. I think they were trying to recommend under 18 inches. Is that right?
Yes, but it's just sketchy. I've kind of stopped talking about this with homeowners because we go down one road and it's going to be completely different in July when they give us this draft guidance. It'll be in law by the end of the year, but the biggest thing is the why on, when you look at your roofs and you look at your siding, it's the biggest surface area of your residence, right? So 2-story house has got a lot of flat parts on that side, and what happens if you're in alignment with the wind direction, and a lot of embers are going to hit that house, and they're either going to go up or down. A majority of them go down just due to gravity, and wind will shut off and the embers will drop down to that 0 to 5 foot zone. And it's super important. So there's got to be something done about it. I just don't know what it looks like yet.
I did watch the presentation, as I mentioned, and they did state a statistic from Chief Analytics Source that said homes with higher vegetation within that 0 to 10 foot space from a home actually have 150% higher wildfire claims and 272% higher loss ratios than homes with defensible space. So I see where they're coming from. Is Zone 0 being implemented anywhere at this time?
We are currently, since our last code adoption, I mentioned every 3 years. So 3 years ago, we did a code adoption. We implemented in the new build environment.
So new developments, homes being rebuilt in fire areas. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe I'm sure Palisades and Eaton fires, there's probably implementing some work there. There's even a new community down in, I forget the city, Escondido maybe, that's built to a really high standard. So it's important. It needs to be done. And then it's 2029. We mentioned that 3-year educational opportunity. So the law itself will get in play this year, but then also written in the law will be a 3-year educational period.
Mhm.
So 2029 is when it actually comes into effect.
Okay. Landon, do you mind going to the next slide to show some examples of what this could look like? So I know this is still kind of in draft mode, but you can see, so they're trying to move away from mulch around homes because that's a combustible item. So it's possible they can go with either a finer grade or maybe just decomposed granite. So not necessarily all hardscape type things. But just things to consider for those of you in the local responsibility area very high. That would be, we're most likely to be affected by the zone 0. I don't believe high or moderate will be affected by this, correct?
Not at this point.
Not at this point. Okay, great. So just things to consider, if you're going to put in a new fence, maybe consider a non-wood option. Again, I know right now we won't even know what's coming out until July, but people are constantly working on their homes. So it's just good for mindful considerations. Maybe we opt for the ceramic pot versus the wood pot, or a metal gate, or, a vinyl gate that is not combustible. So to help eliminate some reinvestments in the future. So that way you can think about that. And then maybe even too, if you're redesigning your backyard, putting furniture away from your home outside of that 0 to 5 space. So just things to consider. I guess we won't really have formal idea of what's happening until the end of the year, but that will be good. Nick, do you have any idea how zone 0 is going to actually be enforced? Because it seems to be pretty tricky.
It's going to be very tricky because right now, currently, we don't really tell people how to live in their backyards, and so now we're going to have to do that. Even though defensible space is a requirement from the structure out, so it is a state law. So even if we don't enforce it, there's still a requirement for every homeowner to comply with state law. We're going to educate a lot about it. I expect and hope everyone on this call calls us out for some type of outreach opportunity, town hall with your HOA, to get the word out and educate. We have some flyers on our Ready, Set, Go website too to kind of guide you on what we expect the 0 to 5 is going to be, but it is state law. So a lot of education in the next 3 years for sure.
I can see the insurance agencies being the one to kind of crack down on this, possibly providing or requiring proof of, compliance, or even not funding a claim if it wasn't followed in the event of a wildfire. So that'll be interesting how it all plays out.
Yes.
All right. So lots of doom and gloom. Sorry. No, just kidding. Don't worry. We're here to help. So there's, I know we've presented a lot of updates, a lot of, the annual inspections. That's going to be a new thing. A lot of new things that are coming into play in the next few years, or even in the next year. So fortunately, OCFA and CalFire have great tools for homeowners, community members who are, board members. So, there are a lot of things to help educate you beyond just, in-person walks and so on. So, Nick, do you mind sharing kind of what Orange County Fire Authority has in place to help homeowners kind of know where to start?
Sure. So I mentioned the 13 cities that are now affected in the unincorporated areas. There's 6 inspectors for all of that work. But we have a Ready, Set, Go website that I think has a lot of good information, a lot of handouts, a lot of things you could put on your website at the HOA level to start educating your folks within your communities. One big thing within that website is the home assessment tool. It's something that's built in-house. You could walk your whole your house and identify things within this home assessment. And it's done by pictures. I like pictures, and so you could just identify what type of roof you have, and then click on that. And then when you're done with it, if you assess your property correctly, it will give you recommendations on what to do. And it's from home hardening to vegetation management. And there's also an opportunity, if you do it yourself, to click the button at the bottom that says you want to be contacted by OCFA. Highly recommend getting one of those 6 inspectors out there to walk your property with you. There's no current requirements. We're not going to issue a notice. I know there's a lot of people scared about that. OCFA on the property going to issue a notice. We don't do that. It's all education, and it's going to give you recommendations, like I said, from the home hardening piece to the vegetation management piece. And then the retrofit piece regards to, what can you do? What size vents should you put in? What's your eaves look like? What are your windows, siding, decks? All that stuff is talked about in that home assessment tool. So visit our website. There's an opportunity to sign up for the home assessment on there as well. And then we will contact you with the inspector that's assigned to that city, and we'll schedule a time to go walk your property.
Nick, do you have, considering a lot of people are going to have to make a few changes, do you have any recommendations on best bang for your buck? If you were to prioritize, what would you do first if it was your home that you had to do? Would it be fence, new gates? What would be like the most important, most impactful change?
So the easiest, well, not the easiest, but I think the most important thing when you talk about veg management, whether it's field mod or defensible space, is eliminating that direct flame and the radiant heat. And so you out there doing work on a weekend, really no cost, throw it in the green waste and be done with it, to eliminate that direct flame and radiant heat. And that'll fix, I'd say, 320 days out of the year, because the winds aren't blowing at that point. Those other days when the winds are blowing, the Santa Ana conditions are happening. And a good example of non-Santa Ana condition is the coastal fire, where we lost 20 structures in Laguna Niguel. And that was all due to ember intrusion. So when the winds are blowing, ember intrusion is the leading cause of structure loss. So ember into attics, whether your venting is a 1/4 inch, not 1/8 inch, looking at your roof types, filling all these nooks and crannies where embers are going to lodge, looking at your eaves. The best thing is to box your eaves in, but someone that knows how to paint and knows how to use a caulking gun to fill all those seams where those nooks and crannies would be is somewhat cheap. I know there's a cost for everything. We're not looking at removing windows. That's a very high dollar item, but we are looking at fixing the problem outside the window. What's going to cause that window to blow out is the fuel that's outside the window. So that's all what we would talk about in that home assessment.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
So some other things that you can do that, we try to even help with on the Monarch team here is the education portion. So, and you can do this in your own communities. That's home hardening. You could do articles. There's, again, a lot of information on the OCFA's Ready, Set, Go site. Pull that information, put it into an article, or even just have an article about the importance of home hardening and direct homeowners to that website. It doesn't need to be super lengthy or herbaceous. It just needs to be there so people know to start looking for it. Evacuation planning, that's another great topic. Even thinking about what to pack, or having a kit in your house ready to go, similar to what you have with the earthquake kit. It's just kind of an emergency response kit. So newsletters, community websites, board meeting updates, those are all great ways to reach your community members. So would definitely recommend telling people, because there's about 45 people on this call. So please share, because this is really important for other community members to know about, especially if you have not been in a very high area and now you are, or even high, especially with those DSDs as you go to sell your house. So another thing we can recommend is just coming up with a plan. As we mentioned earlier, going out and taking just stock of what you have in terms of, okay, this slope is looking great, this slope needs to be renovated, and then just coming up with a plan. I know budgets are limitations. You can only raise due so much each year, and no one likes a special assessment. It may have to be done, but if you come up with a plan and again, you're educating your community, that does make it a lot easier to move that down. So, again, having your landscape committee do this, or your monarch consultant, bringing OCFA in to make sure that your plan is something that they would support, starting 2026, that's really great. So some ways to help your plans move forward more quickly are grants that are out there. There's federal grants, but there's also CalFire's Wildfire Prevention Grant. That's for hazardous vegetation removal. So basically, ground covers that can't be maintained below 24 inches, that needs to be removed. That's a great thing to put in there. Making sure, getting that vertical clearance, species that are not recommended. Let's remove those. Anything that's kind of more prone to emmer reignition. So usually with those, it does take a while. It's good to have your own plan in place using your own HOA funds, because it's about a 2-year process to turn around. So, let's get those year 1 projects done now. And then if you want to try to speed it up, you can try to go for maybe that years 2, 3, 4, 5, so on. Those projects, try to get funds for, but it's always good to have your own projects in your budget to move forward. Because I don't think Dick's going to be happy, and his team's going to be happy if everyone's waiting around. So it's definitely something that we're going to have to start budgeting for as a homeowners association. So, and then part of that too, that grant can cover a community wildfire prevention plan, which goes hand in hand with identifying those areas and coming up with a timeline and prioritization. So, and two, if you have a CWPP, you can apply for other grants like the federal grant. That's a requirement. You either can apply for grant funds through this specific federal grant I'm thinking of, to create a CWPP. And then once you have it, you can apply for the actual vegetation removal. Or if you have that CWPP, so it's just good to have that plan in place. If you are removing any acacia, we would highly recommend that you do, plant things that are on an approved plant palette from OCFA, like the CO5, and really pay attention to spacing. So you don't need to plant things under trees. It's actually better to leave that more bare, especially because you do need that vertical clearance. So if you can't keep your ground cover below 24 inches and keep that vertical clearance more than 4 feet, just don't plant anything under there. And that way too, you'll save money on plants. If you kind of are doing the spacing that's appropriate, you'll be in compliance, and also you'll need less plant material and also less maintenance, which is good. So, and then we also have helped a few communities become Firewise USA certified. It's a great community-led program. So you identify a community leader. You'd have, you'd be kind of working with your neighbors, because, one neighbor's home and the state of their defensible space in that zone 0 is going to affect your home. Because if they have a lot of vegetation, a lot of fuel, and you're doing everything you can, that is still going to affect your home. So it's best to just work together to protect your community as a whole. And that's kind of what that program is in place to do. It's pretty minimal requirements in terms of financial requirements, because they do take volunteer hours. So essentially you would need 1 volunteer hour per home in that community. And a volunteer is essentially the equivalent to $33.49 an hour. So if you have 1,000 homes, you would need to either have 1,000 hours, or you could have 500 hours and split up the rest with, if the HOA wanted to pay for a project, or, if the HOA is already doing wildfire prevention work, such as removing acacia, that project could actually qualify towards your annual, hours that would be spent, because you need to essentially spend like $33,490. So, that's a good way to help get that minimum. So, and that too can help with some homeowners getting homeowner insurance discounts. There are certain vendors who will offer those discounts. So, and then one thing that I kind of noticed, we had a few friends who lost their homes to the recent fires, and one thing that kind of came up was the importance of keeping your home values and your home insurance up to date. Nick, you did a lot of these assessments on the fires too as well, right? Yeah. So from my understanding is that homeowners insurance is paying what the value of the home is for your policy. So if you bought your home, for $820,000 and you haven't updated your policy or had your home value reassessed and have your policy match, you're not going to get paid the value of your home, which has gone up significantly for many people. So it's just something to consider. I think we've talked long enough. I think we should probably open this up to some questions. So